by members of the House ballroom community. Additionally, the COP will increase the audience's knowledge of the subculture and describe the public health organizations, how they can support these gender diverse communities. Today's learning objectives, of course, will be to review a brief history of ballroom culture, misappropriation, define key terminology for HBCs, illustrate foundational HBC structure, and explore interventions of HBC to prevent HIV. So right now we're going to look at a brief clip, and this is actually how Ballroom was started. It was started through Crystal LaBeija through this monumental event right here. It was in a documentary called The Queen, and as you'll see in this clip, the little dialogue and banter that actually started Ballroom.
Zami, we can't hear. Zami, we still really can't hear.
Bear with me one moment.
We don't see the clip, Zami. And you're muted, so you.
Let's try now.
London, continue on with your presentation and we'll play the clip at the end.
Okay, sure. So just to kind of give everyone a brief history of House Ballroom, it actually started in the 1970s, and it was in the world of drag pageantry, which favored white contestants, where this blossomed into house balls it was an act of protest. House Ballroom is a vibrant subculture of Black and Latinx, homosexual, transgender, and queer people where they can express themselves freely and find acceptance in a disenfranchised community. So basically, Crystal LaBeija, she decided to, once they were asked during drag pageants to lighten their skin, and a lot of times the pageants were set up so that the non-white contestants would never place first, and so she decided, as her act of revolution, to create House Ballroom. So we have the House Ballroom terminology. So there are various terms that are used in House Ballroom. One is called Butch Queen, there's Femme Queen, there's Butch, there's Women. And recently we started to add into the categories a non-binary category because there was a lot of issue around gender roles within ballroom. There's also trans men, and then there are house overall categories. There's Butch Queen up in drags, and then that's when you break into the statuses within ballroom, okay? And so the statuses are icon, legend, pioneer, statement, and of course, Star. The familial structure of House Ballroom creates an atmosphere of loyalty and respect, and the structure promotes mentoring, identity development, guidance, and social solidarity for members, not only through competition in ballroom, but interactions with the chosen family. House members compete individually, in teams, or as a house, expanding transferable skills like interpersonal communication, emotional intelligence. Competing in balls provides social status and validation to participants who can use these merits for survival, self-assurance, and influence. Inside the ballroom doors is a sanctuary from the storms of judgment shadowing participants in their daily lives. It is a feeling of liberation many never have experienced, with this opportunity to live out fantasies through categories, costumes, makeup, hairstyles, performances, and visual arts. Many of these expressions of effects are commentary on social justice with a myriad of emotions from joy to grief. And the deeming of titles is based on impact has on ballroom and contributions to the scene. So if you look on the structure, that each one of these things are required to exist for balls to exist. So children within houses, and there has to be house parents. That goes into the ball. And within the ball system, there's a validation, there's prizes, and there's social status. There have been multiple references to house ballroom culture in art, music, fashion, and dance, but many always refer back to that Madonna's iconic Vogue video. I'm sure everyone has heard of the Vogue video or seen the Vogue video. The misappropriation of Vogue dance by Madonna took the acclaim that should have been credited to the house ballroom scene. Madonna used the choreography of Jose Extravaganza and hired him as a dancer on her tours. Madonna monetary gain from the Vogue video, none of those monies went back into house ballroom. And it exploited the struggle. It has been a continual point of contention for house ballroom. In the song, she named only white persons in reference to the categories using terminology created by queer people of color. Jenny Livingston, a documentary filmmaker, first noticed voguing at Washington Square Park in the West Village. Livingston, a white queer woman, spent 6 years filming Paris is Burning, a documentary about the lives of LGBT people of color in the 1980s ball culture. While the film received box office acclaim, and it also received what's called the Grand Jury Prize for Documentary at Sundance, as well as also GLAAD Media Awards, it was very problematic. Some argue that Livingston should not have documented that scene at all, that her white woman's gaze othered ball culture, that she was profiting from an art format to which she did not belong, and that the drag balls she depicted were problematic because she placed too much volume on the heteronormativity. Livingston didn't make much money from the film. She made just around, I think, $55,000, which is provided she actually took those $55,000 and split up and tried to provide for the 13 participants, which is a violation of journalistic ethics. She didn't become a household star, but the film did allow a cross-section of culture to be viewed. I think this video helped us to depend, she said at one point, I think this video helped us depend on each other, and it made us feel like we were somebody. Jose Extravaganza mentioned that to Miss Livingston. So when I participated in the initial Pose, when Pose was actually trying to get on FX, and there was a big issue around Jenny Livingston's participation because of Miramax and licensing. And so they ended up bringing Jenny Livingston on as an executive producer. And a lot of people, including some of the extravaganzas who were actually a part of Pose, were in protest of her being a part of the project, or at least how much role she would have in the project. So Pose, just while we're speaking of Pose, Pose is a drama show that airs on FX. which I participated. And these series take place in New York in the late 1980s and focuses on underground ballroom scenes. The sitcom does a good job of portraying the Black and Latino LGBTQ communities. Not only do we learn about the organization of ballroom, the residences, moms, brothers, and contests, but we also learn about the challenges of the community as LGBTQ and people attempt to be accepted in society as age strikes their group. So I was going to ask, has anyone seen any of these films or TV shows?
And I just put the link for the Pose overview in the chat from FX. So people, unmute yourself and talk to us about what you know about Pose or the Madonna video. I can remember watching the Madonna video, and that's where I learned about. So come on, talk to us. Unmute and talk to us, colleagues. I see in the chat that people love Pose. Some people watch Pose. Do some people remember the Madonna video and what you saw the first time? I remember when I first saw it, I thought it was amazing. I had no idea what was going on, but I loved it. Little did I know that that was taken from people of color.
Yes.
Yep, I remember that video, and yeah, it was awesome. And I feel like just in recent years, I've discovered the connection there. I was like, oh, this was like the jam, everybody doing their thing. But this is such important history for us all to be aware of and understand, just how easily that happens when people of privilege get involved and even hire someone to show them something. The next thing you know, they take it and make it their own.
Yep. There's someone who's never seen Pose but heard of it. It's a great show. It really documents a time in history. Wouldn't you say, London? It talks really about what it was like to be a queer person of color in the village at that time.
Yes. And for me personally, I remember I was so young when Vogue came out, but I remember a family member telling me, oh, do you know how to do that new Vogue dance, right? And I started to do the movements and they were like, you better stop right now. And for me, that's how I remember it, because what I was doing to them was considered to be very effeminate. And that's what helped me to really understand, gender roles and understand, the social determinants, the social constructs around gender, right? And that I was not supposed to be doing this very effeminate, soft dancing or posing, even though I was good at doing it, right? Someone told me to stop doing it.
We have another comment in the chat that Pose is great. Watch the documentary Strike a Pose from the perspective of the Vogue dancers for Madonna's tour, which is really interesting. In London, can you tell us what you mean by misappropriation? Just break that down for us a little bit.
Yeah, well, simply the same, cultural appreciation versus a misappropriation, which is like the example of what Madonna did, right? Madonna did not, at least Jenny Livingston attempted to at least put some of the money back into the community and to uplift the community. Whereas though Madonna took directly from the community, she never gave credit to where she got the information from or where she learned the art from. And she also never she didn't directly put money back into the community to uplift the community. She also took the words and terminology used by community, like Lita Haywood gave good faith. Those are terms that were created by House Ballroom, but she could have, used some other, she could have even used some African-American women or Latinx women or men in those, when she created those lyrics.
Yes, and we see here in another comment in the chat, it's been a while since I've seen it, but the Kiki film was probably my first exposure to ballroom.
Okay.
Nathan, could you tell us a little bit more about the Kiki film for people who are uninformed like me?
Yeah, so the Kiki film, I had seen that it was showing at the Denver film, the Psy, I believe, the film center. And so it was, yeah, from what I can remember, it was kind of like a documentary regarding like, I believe a group from Harlem, New York, specifically, in the ballroom scene. And it was kind of showing challenges and kind of the process of identity and exploring ballroom.
Yeah, so the Kiki scene is within ballroom is so there's what's called main ballroom or the main scene, and then you call Kiki scene. So the Kiki scene is typically with younger, like school age, high school, basically started in a lot of the community based organizations within New York and some of the schools that it's like an after school, like in after school programs, right? And so they want to join the mainstream, but they start off in Kiki to kind of, it's like a practice for them, right? So it's like, okay, let's learn how to do this, let's learn how to do that within our own space. And that's how Kiki is, like the Kiki ballroom scene is. And it's like in the word Kiki as in, I'm sorry, the word Kiki as in being funny, it's like the names of the houses are like the House of Mattel or the House of Old Navy, where it's like, I'm in the House of Mugler or the House of Balenciaga, which are actually larger, more, high fashion houses. And then they call themselves, the House of Old Navy,
At the at one of my previous jobs, I had worked at a organization for HIV and AIDS, who's center based, but they actually would hold Kikis there in Cleveland for the younger groups and stuff. And so we would actually have them at the clinic. And so it was pretty awesome to see.
Awesome.
And we're getting some love in the chat, London, about Legendary.
Yes, in my house.
Legendary
Yes.
On HBO.
Yes, so Legendary, my house actually won that, the $100,000. My house, Mugler won the $100,000 on Legendary. And so Legendary comes on HBO, and on Legendary, there are, the way the houses are broken is that they all have, it's kind of like, we call it in ballroom, we call them exhibition balls, right? And so sometimes like let's just say like the W Hotel or these major, businesses, organizations used to highlight ballroom, highlight specific categories, and like they would invite certain people to come and do it. And it's kind of like the same idea of like an exhibition ball where they would invite specific houses. So it'd be like 6 houses that are invited. And then you come and there's a specific subject, and each week, the effect is based off of this subject. And you have to come each week and battle the other houses, and it will incorporate Vogue, it may incorporate sex siren, it may incorporate various categories, but it tends to focus on Legendary. They tend to focus on Vogue a lot more because that's a lot of times what people know of and a lot of times what people want to see. And so that's where the focus tends to be on Legendary.
Awesome. All right. I think we're ready for the next slide there.
Okay. So let me see. So House Ballroom Community's original self-directed response to inequities in optimum healthcare outcomes is was through originally the Gay Men's Health Crisis, which is the GMHC. The Gay Men's Health, has the longest standing HIV and AIDS prevention program that focuses on ballroom community, with the founding of the House of Latex and its annual Latex Ball, which is an HIV and AIDS prevention ball, for 3 decades. The Latex Ball is by far the most popular ball in the country, usually drawing between 2,500 to 3,000 audience members and participants. And it's not federally funded, but provides access to prevention outreach, linkage to care, testing, surveillance, and resources. This and the following programs, campaigns, organizations were founded by House Ballroom Community, often with financial support from external organizations. And these responses to the growing disparities faced by this subculture and coined interventions or activities that are conducted and sustained through practices, processes within an at-risk community themselves. Marlon Bailey's concept of interventions, which he defines as a public health action conducted and sustained through practices and processes within an at-risk community themselves, as a model for how to develop self-organized networks of community prevention and treatment and care. And again, you guys, I apologize, I'm sick, I'm under the weather, so if I'm a little hoarse, please forgive me. The House of Latex, so that name is so funny because the House of Latex, obviously the name latex is a reference to the condom, but at one period of the way that they end up becoming the House of Latex is because people were afraid to go over to the condom table because it was assumed that if you went to the condom table, you had HIV, right? If you automatic, so they said, won't we go ahead and create our own house of latex, and it'll make it easier for people to come over and get access to and do the outreach, right? So they created the House of Latex based off of that. So more research is required to evaluate these processes and effectiveness in HIV prevention. And these examples of ballroom community interventions attempt to address the gaps in research to provide culturally appropriate, sustainable HIV prevention interventions. The aforementioned structure of ballroom that provides kinship, safety, responsibility, loyalty, and self-development can be leveraged to gain optimal prevention outcomes. So just for me, I wanted to give like a personal reflection and testimony. So during my matriculation at Morehouse, I joined the House of Escada, and it was founded, and I was founded on campus as an underclassman by mentors of mine who were upperclassmen. And so House Ballroom taught me camaraderie, the power of intersectionality, solidarity within and amongst movements. We partnered with groups like NESM to become our fiscal sponsor while we applied for 501c3 status, and we received a grant from Aid Atlanta to host the first ball in the historic Fox Theater to provide testing, resources, and direct linkage to care. We work with Youth Pride to provide tutoring and mentorship, and and also scholarship. Ballroom's self-directed response to HIV prevention and health through intervention was out of our desperation. It was our desperation to save ourselves. My house father, Tony Moultrie, a Morehouse alumni, made sure his home was open for study hours, meals, resources, and direction. There were times while I sat at the house table in the early morning participating in the balls that he made sure I got to school in time for statistics. My parents, fortunately, were very much supportive of my ballroom participation and transition. However, my house parents became partners with my biological parents to make sure that I thrived. He asked for my syllabi for the rest of the semester at a ball, and he popped his trunk after the ball, and there were all my books for the entire semester. So the many times that I battled with personal difficulties that could lead me down a different path, he was there to meet me with adoration and the support of my house, which was definitely meant a lot to my growth and to who I am today. So an example, so here we have one of the interventions, which is called the House Lives Matter. House Lives Matter, which is HBC, was created for community organizing, mobilizing, and organization. Centers the voices of Black and Latinx trans women survivors, and provides free transportation, activities, and hotels. And it does they actually collaborate, House Lives Matter collaborates with a lot of organizations, including Equinox in New York, they created this amazing campaign for during Pride, and the funding from that actually went back into House Lives Matter, which went into going into HIV and AIDS organizations. They donated back from House Lives Matter. Keeping Ballroom Community Alive Network is an amazing organization. So Keeping Ballroom Alive, I've actually been received from them what's called the Crystal Abasia Organizing Fellowship. And that is to further the Black radical tradition of transgender leadership. It selects between 5 to 10 transgender and gender nonconforming leaders in the House Ballroom community who will work to further CAPCAN's missions and social justice and ballroom related activities. One of the things that we actually participated in during one of our large conferences, it was in collaboration with House Lives Matter. CAPCAN worked with House Lives Matter. We had this convening in New York City, and we actually marched down to City Hall to protest around a Black trans woman who was a part of Ballroom. Her name was Leilene Polanco, and she died under mysterious circumstances at Rikers Island. And so we actually got involved, got her family involved, went down to City Hall, and they started to actually investigate and look into this and to create new policies around housing transgender persons in the jail. Next, we have Destination Tomorrow, which was founded by a transgender man, Sean Coleman. They have, through them, they also created what's called the Transgender Community Impact Fund, and there's multiple employment opportunities. Destination Tomorrow has hired so many of my transgender friends who are in Ballroom. They work there today. They've been working there since its inception. The Transgender Community Impact Fund, in collaboration with Gilead, funding has been placed in multiple organizations, including one here in Baltimore City, which is Baltimore Safe Haven, which is run by a Black trans woman. And those funds have been allocated throughout to different transgender organizations. So I'm so grateful to Sean Coleman and his work. There's also the HEAT program, and so the HEAT program is not a Ballroom founded organization. However, they're one of the first organizations to work with Ballroom to create interventions, which were major campaigns using Ballroom figures in their campaigns. And actually, some of the images where people laid back into these beautiful voguing positions. And so it employs transgender and non-binary individuals of color. It focuses on the needs of youth and young adults living with HIV, and is committed to providing age-appropriate and culturally competent care. So this is my mentor, Dr. Ayanna Elliott, who's a trans woman, also an icon member of Ballroom. And, Ayanna has been a part of the creation of multiple programs, including the Infinity program, the Just One of the Girls programs. And she also started to work, she worked with some of my fellow colleagues over at Hopkins, Bloomberg, Tanya Pati, Manat Malik, and they started their own, the two articles that you see above, which is HIV prevention amongst transgender populations, knowledge gaps and evidence for action. There's intersectionality research for transgender health justice, a theory-driven conceptual framework for structural analysis of transgender health inequities. And the goal of this study was to compile a list of available evidence-based HIV prevention programs for transgender persons. Only a few evidence-based HIV prevention programs have been tried on transgender people, and the majority of available interventions are aimed at changing transgender women's behavior, with only one HIV prevention program being studied for transgender males. Biomedical interventions for transgender women are the subject of ongoing research, and few programs target social and structural HIV prevention hurdles such as stigma, prejudice, and poverty. And to address HIV prevalence and inequalities, evidence-based multi-level treatments that address structural, biological, and behavioral risks for HIV among transgender populations, including transgender males, are required. Future research should focus not just on pre-exposure prophylaxis and condom usage, but also on the structural barriers that hinder access to these preventative techniques. So finally, we have some discussion questions. What impact did Ballroom status and House Ballroom have on the effectiveness of interventions in HBC spaces? How does the HBC house system promote resiliency and survival as an intervention? And what strategies can be pulled from HBC examples to promote interventions with transgender communities at your agency?
This is a great time to unmute and let's talk a little bit. Like, what did you learn about the impact that Ballroom status and house structure have on these, have on these interventions? What did you learn about that? And just a reminder, when we talk about interventions, when London talks about these interventions, Go back to that PowerPoint there for me, Zami. I think it's the PowerPoint with House Matters, and yeah, keep going back. One more. So interventions are these strategies that and activities that are conducted and sustained through practices and processes with at-risk communities themselves. So this is for us, by us, saving ourselves, right, London? That's a great way to talk about this. So that's what we mean by intraventions. It's that community saving itself, not depending upon someone from the outside. So how do you think the house ballroom structure supports that? You can unmute or you can type it into the chat.
I mean, I can go back and give an example. I gave an example of how I was at Morehouse and how my house father, jumped in. He jumped directly in to save me, right? And help me with getting my books and providing that, space for me.
Yeah. So that house structure becomes important. Yes, Jai Smith, do you have your hand up?
Hi. One of the things that it makes me think about is how we talk about in public health, the necessity for building rapport very quickly. Especially I think about, I used to be doing HIV testing. And so there was always this, we have 15 minutes to build rapport, to talk about sexual behavior, to talk about ways to increase our health, all these different things that are trying to happen in 15 minutes. And it sounds like this structure of you're working with folks who are already community leaders, who are already who are already leading these houses, all of that rapport and all of that trust is already built. So it sounds like it would lend really well to getting folks who are maybe newer to the community, or folks who maybe are on that that fence of should I get tested? Should I talk about these things? It sounds like that rapport is already built, and it would lend really well to that structure.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right, Jai. Thank you so much. Zami, back to those questions. London, I just took over for a second because I got so excited about that first question. So the second question is, how does this house structure system, how does that promote survival and resiliency? Unmute and talk to us about it.
Well, I'm excited that you were excited about this as well. So am I unmuted? Okay, it muted me, and then am I unmuted?
You're unmuted. So
okay.
Yeah, I mean, are there other examples? I know, Nate, you talked about the key keys that you worked with, and just give some examples of how the house systems here.
So when you look at if you could go back to the slide, Zami, there's a slide that has the structure of HBCs, the structure of ballroom. There we go. Okay, so if you look at the slide, right, and you see the structure of ballroom, you see the impact that it has. Obviously, house parents are people that you respect, that provide, guidance, they provide mentoring, right? And so those structures are really important. Also, not just until when you get into the ballroom scene, but when you leave those spaces. And so there's social status, there's validation, there's prizes. And so the prizes that you get from winning, and also the status, which would be the icon, the legend, the statement, that social status, not only does it provide you validation and gives you some worth, but it also helps with survival, right? It helps you to be able to provide knowledge and information, because people will listen to you more when you are a pioneer, an icon, a legend. People are more, in depth and more inept to listen to what you have to say.
Awesome. And stay right there, Zami. There's a great question here, London, we would love for you to answer. And is there much of a ballroom scene in the West, or is this mostly seen in the East Coast?
Oh, definitely. Oh, wow. There's, so when you say the West, LA has a huge ballroom scene. There's actually, so one of the young ladies that one of the things that happened with us being with Cloth, the Cap Can organization, is that they started their scene in Seattle, which has been growing. There's a scene, there are smaller scenes that their members might not be as large, but they're part of the larger group. And so the larger population of ballroom was going to be in LA, like the Los Angeles, Oakland, San Francisco area. But then there's the Midwest, which is huge. There is Texas, which is huge as well. And so that's how we break up into different regions, right? So like your houses have different regions, they have different regional parents, and it's up to the regional parents to collaborate, and then they end up deciding on where they want to have a larger ball, right? So like there was just a huge House Lives Matter ball in LA, maybe a couple of months ago, maybe 2 months ago. There was a huge House Lives Matter ball in LA. I've heard of any ballrooms in LA. Yes, and so what I could do is share in our networks. I can share to you guys some of the balls that are happening. So there's a ball that's coming up recently. It'll be coming up actually Saturday. It's actually this one is in New York, but it is the ball of the year. It's called the coldest winter, and it is sponsored by major organizations. They all sponsor. It's in a huge venue. It is up to they're giving away $10,000 for one category, $7,000 for, huge amounts of money. And it's in New York at what's called the Knockdown Center. And that is on February the 19th. And Denver has a ballroom scene as well. It's just, again, it's small, it's not as large as, of course, like New York, but we have a scene in Europe as well. We have a European chapter. House of Glad, we have a European chapter that's huge in Paris. We have members in London. We have members in Russia. We have members in China. We have members in Croatia. We have members in Switzerland, Amsterdam.
And I'm also seeing that there is a great house scene in Vegas. So another comment comes in, poor New Mexico, all the good scenes are 7 hours away. Well, John, we have London as a part of our identity consultant team. Maybe London can work with some of the communities in New Mexico and start something. Remember, these are community started institutions. And so we can help get some things going.
Definitely. And even like I've mentioned before, what's called exhibition balls, working on exhibition balls. And, listen, we're in a new time where things are virtual. A lot of balls now are virtual, and they have been since the pandemic. Things we've been doing, we've worked with Housing Works in New York, and Housing Works sponsored a ball online, a virtual ball where you're able to actually, you could see like maybe 8 boxes on the screen, and people are competing in each box. And so the judges can still see. I actually worked on a ball with the designer, Mark Jacobs, and we gave away $5,000 for a runway category. Someone actually flew in a helicopter, like, so the screens, it's a virtual ball, but they were flying in to the space in a helicopter and landed. Just crazy stuff. The creativity is still there, even in a virtual space.
Awesome. And then we have one more discussion question there. Zami, thank you for being our Zoom expert today.
Yes, thank you so much, Zami.
So, and this is for everyone, what strategies can be pulled from the examples that we talked about to promote interventions within your transgender communities? So what can you start to do in your agencies to promote intervention? So unmute and talk to us, colleagues.
I know.
There's a comment here. I love how the house is focused on identity development. Oh, someone was going to talk. Go ahead. Oh, there's a comment here in the chat. Are the Latinx communities involved in the ball scene?
Yes, the house of so our house has a large population of Latinx members within our house, House of Blair. But the House of Extravaganza is historically the iconic, Latinx house, the House of Extravaganza. That's how it's been. But now within Ballroom, all the houses are so integrated. There's not just, at this point in Ballroom, it's ballroom is it's so expansive. It's cisgender, it's transgender, it's white, it's black, it's Asian. I mean, it's just all types, all populations are involved. But there's actually so there's now South American chapters as well of ballroom. I forgot to mention that as well. There's chapters in South America. There's chapters in there's one in Brazil. I think there's some in Colombia, Venezuela, Argentina. Those are some of the places where balls have actually they started to do balls at recently.
So there is
Cuba as well. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so there is a growing Latinx
Yes.
community involved in the ball scene.
Yes.
And London, I have a quick question. Are there any like sister, you know how sometimes US gets together with other countries and other regions to, you know, combine ideas and share? Do you all do any of that with some of the newer ball houses?
Yeah, so so actually there was just a ball yesterday in Switzerland, and they flew out, two of my friends, they actually become the commentator. So the houses exist within those countries. So like House of Mugler, we have a chapter in Amsterdam, we have a chapter in Paris, like all the Ebonies have a chapter, like all the major houses here. The way that they acclimate, the house, international houses acclimate, is that they end up joining the US houses. And they create their own chapters there. And then there becomes this great thing where we like bond through like language and you know, culture and language. I mean, and a lot of people, for ballroom members, a lot of the ways that they've actually traveled has been because of ballroom. Because some of the organizations overseas, like with the Love Ball in Austria, in Vienna, Austria, where Fergie, you know, chartered a whole 757 and flew everyone out to Vienna, Austria. You know, a lot of people's travel and actually getting a passport has to do with them being a part of ballroom. And it opened that travel gate for them to, you know, get out and see the world. And they just kept going from there. You know, they're doing what's called classes. And so there's one of my house members, Arturo, he does these classes, these huge classes in Paris. And there's also Marquise Clanton, they're doing these huge classes, you know, overseas. And then they, you know, the members also come back over to the United States as well.
That is awesome to know. It's really good to know that the communities are looking forward to building identity, building resilience, opening up opportunities. Remember, those are the interventions we want you to start thinking about building in your community.
Right. Right.
And Zami, I think you have a comment to add as well.
I do. Thanks, Ty. I was just thinking about the last question around strategies, and what it makes me think of is the agency I used to work for, whose unofficial slogan was, "We are the community we serve." And so when thinking about creating interventions, one of the things I really enjoy about the house ballroom scene is that they are the community they're serving. So part of this is, you know, for us, by us. And when thinking about agencies, it makes me think about what are agencies' hiring practices. You know, when you're developing programming for transgender and non-binary and gender expansive communities, you know, who are the folks who are running those programs? How many non-binary folks do you have? How many trans folks or gender expansive folks do you have? And if you don't have any running those programs, this is a good time for agencies to come together and say, how do we actually develop a workforce that embraces and brings on transgender and non-binary folks, and how do we give them the professional development, mentorship, and attention needed so that they really build up their skills as a way to invest in the community and the longevity of the community, and fight some of the systemic barriers that often transgender and non-binary folks face when trying to get into the workforce. So developing programming, but also having trans and non-binary folks run those programs and be a part of those programs.
And that is something that we can provide technical assistance on. So if you're thinking, I would love to do what Zami just said, we have Zami and London who can help you do that.
Right. So again, another example, so at Hopkins, I was actually brought in as a guest professor one day to do a whole course with a student, with students in the interdisciplinary program on Ballroom, right? So they brought me in, to be the subject matter expert, to actually use me in that space and to actually teach. Instead of the professor that was there, actually, he reached out to me and said he would prefer that I come in and actually do this program, right? And so we worked together with the Peabody Institute, the iconic Peabody Institute here in Baltimore, which is actually now owned by Hopkins, or is a part of Hopkins, to do a ballroom experience, right? And so the ballroom experience included taking a course. So it was collaborating with a course at Peabody, the School of Dance, and they had, they provided dance training paid by the paid instructor in ballrooms. The person was, that's the important thing is you have to, you can't just access information and not want to pay for the information from people in community, and just take from community. These organizations are actually putting the funds back into the community, into the organizations. And actually, there was Marquise. He actually taught a class. He was a paid instructor. We actually did a ball with the Mellon Foundation at the Peabody, and through that process became a film project that went to multiple different film festivals and won several different prizes, all based on, Ballroom Experience, right? And how Ballroom Experience works. So it's like creating these collaborations that exist within the communities. You have these, these major institutions and these academic spaces that exist right in your community that can help provide foundation and facilitate change within not only their own institutions, but within Ballroom.
That is good to know. And thank you, Zami and London, for that challenge. We're going to be meeting next Tuesday, 11 a.m. Mountain Time, to talk about what's in a name. It is a two-part series on legal transitions and government IDs. Our two SMEs are Jordan Blisk and Callan Smith. We are hoping to see you then. Thank you for your time today. We will be sending this out as a recording, and then you can play the video that we were having problems with. It's a lovely 90-second video on YouTube. Thank you for your time today. Let's give London a big hand clap. This was a labor of love for London. She prevailed. She's not feeling her best today, but she came in here and gave us a lecture. And if I knew how to Vogue, I would Vogue for you. All right. Thank you all. We love you. See you next week. Have a great Tuesday. Drink some water and tell someone you love them.
Bye-bye.